In the distance, cicadas hum a lazy tune, while terracotta rooftops glow with the golden light of a setting sun. Tonight, we journey back nearly 2 millennia to a time when Rome was not only an empire, but a living world of ritual, tradition, and deeply personal ceremony. Our focus? A particular and evocative part of Roman life weddings. Far from being merely a legal arrangement, a Roman wedding was an intricate blend of sacred custom, civic duty, and social theatre. It was a rite that bore the weight of family lineage, honour, and the blessings of the gods. Whether grand or modest, every wedding told a story of alliances forged, fortunes exchanged, and hopes quietly woven into the fabric of the Republic, and later, the Empire. Let us begin not with senators and empresses, but among the everyday people. Let us walk slowly into the heart of an ordinary Roman wedding day. Picture this. You are in the modest home of a Roman plebeian family. The home is unassuming, set within a bustling insula or apartment block in the city of Rome. It is the morning of the wedding, and though the household is modest in means, the air is thick with anticipation. The bride, perhaps no more than 15 years old, awakens before dawn. Her room is small, its walls painted with fading frescoes of birds and leaves. She rises slowly, the woven straw of her bedding creaking softly beneath her. Today, she will leave this room forever. Not for death, but for marriage, kind of second birth. She is assisted by female relatives, and perhaps a slave girl, who has known her since childhood. They bathe her in water drawn from the public fountain, cooled overnight in ceramic jars. A small fire is lit to warm the room, and she is rubbed with perfumed oil, its scent mild and herbaceous lavender, maybe, or crushed myrtle. Her hair is arranged in a complex style known as the sine crines, a ritual plaiting of 6 locks parted with a spearhead echo of ancient warlike purity, linking her to Roman matrons of old. There is no veil yet, only the careful hands of women who remember their own wedding days with quiet intensity. The bride's tunic is white and long, tied with a woolen belt knotted in the nodus, Herculaneus, the knot of Hercules. This knot is symbolic, thought to guard her virtue, and only the husband may untie it later. Over her head, a flame-coloured veil called the flammeum is draped, translucent yet glowing like a late summer sunset. It is both a shield and a beacon, a reminder of Vesta, goddess of the hearth. In the central atrium, the house is being swept and decorated. Laurel branches, symbolic of victory, are tied with red and gold ribbons. The groom will arrive soon, dressed in a simple white toga, flanked by his father, and perhaps a few close friends. The marriage contract has already been arranged, its terms agreed upon in the presence of witnesses. This day is not a surprise. It is the fruit of negotiation, sometimes affection, often strategy. When the groom finally arrives, there is no dramatic flourish, no music blaring, no sudden cheers. He is announced softly, and he enters with calm dignity. The bride and groom stand before a small household altar, upon which offerings have already been made. A few grains of spelt, a splash of wine, the fragrant smoke of burning incense curling into the air like a sleeping snake. The priestess, or pontifex, speaks in deliberate cadence. There is no shouting, no weeping. Only ritual phrases, ubi tu Gaius, ego Gaia, symbolic affirmation. Where you are Gaius, I am Gaia. These words are not about names but roles. The bride becomes not just a wife, but a Roman wife, stepping into a framework that stretches back to Romulus himself. After the ceremony, there is a modest procession. The bride is led to her new home. She does not walk alone. She is accompanied by torchbearers, singers, and children tossing nut symbols of fertility and of casting away childish things. At the threshold of her new house, she pretends reluctance, miming fear or hesitation. Then, she is lifted over the threshold not because she is unwilling, but because it would be ill-omened for her to stumble. Inside, she lights the hearth fire with a torch taken from her parents' home, merging the old flame with the new. There, in the flickering light, her new life begins. As dusk falls over the tiled roofs of the city, the clamour of the day dissolves into murmurs. The guests are fed a simple meal cheese, bread, olives, and diluted wine. The Roman Republic stands at a curious crossroads, teetering between old traditions and the ambitions of powerful men. In this climate, the marriage of Julia, daughter of Julius Caesarto, The renowned general Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, known simply as Pompey the Great, was not merely a personal affair. It was a strategic alignment, a political maneuver dressed in ceremonial garb. Julia was perhaps just 16 at the time, young by modern standards, though quite typical in Roman society. She was known for her gentle demeanour, a woman not of grand public speeches, but of private grace. Her father, Julius Caesar, a cunning statesman, had much to gain from a marital alliance with Pompey, whose military conquests in the East had earned him the adoration of the Roman populace and the wary respect of the Senate. Pompey himself was older, over 40, a man carved by campaigns and commands, not unfamiliar with marriage, but never before bound by such a consequential union. Though it began as a political compact, their marriage is remembered with unusual tenderness. Ancient sources, such as Plutarch, hint that genuine affection blossomed between them. Pompey, it is said, grew deeply fond of Julia, to the point that he preferred her company to that of his political peers. This surprised many. In a world where marriages often served public roles more than private warmth, theirs stood as a gentle exception. Their wedding day, while not lavish in the theatrical sense, would have reflected their stature. The domus, perhaps Caesar's own, would have been adorned in laurel and marble, echoing not only Roman tradition but the personal grandeur of its patriarchs. The contract of marriage, likely drawn up with the utmost care, was witnessed by men who shaped the fate of nations. Guests may have included future historians, rival senators, or generals cloaked in anticipation, but above all the politics and ceremony, there was Julia draped in her flammeum, crowned with wreaths of flowers, crossing the marble threshold of a man who, despite his ambitions, seemed softened by her presence. There are quiet anecdotes, almost whispered by time. One recounts how Julia, fearing her husband might be harmed in a political riot, sent a servant to follow him, an act of anxious affection rather than protocol. Pompey, upon discovering this, did not chide her, but cherished the sentiment. Tragically, Julia's life would not be long. In 54 BCE, just 5 years after their marriage, she died in childbirth. The child, too, did not survive. Her death sent a quiet shock through Roman society, but for Pompey, it marked a deeper wound. So affected was he by her passing that he delayed the funeral, reluctant to part with her body. When the time came, her ashes were interred in the field of Mars, against tradition but with the people's support. For once, the strictness of Roman law bent before the quiet reverence of grief. This loss did more than grieve a husband. It fractured the alliance between Caesar and Pompey. Without Julia to bind them, suspicion and rivalry deepened. Within a few years, the two Menonce, bound by marriage, would face each other in civil war. And yet, in the soft, echoing halls of memory, the story of Julia and Pompey remains a rare instance of love within the corridors of Roman power. A wedding born of politics, yes, but shaded with kindness, marked with affection, and ultimately mourned with dignity. Let us now turn away from biography and drift toward another kind of remembrancia, slower, deeper layer of history, buried not in scrolls, but in the soil of time, beneath layers of stone and ash, tucked into the corners of ruined villas, and entombed in the long, silent crypts of Roman cemeteries. Fragments of ancient weddings remain. They do not speak in voices, but in clay, metal, and faded pigment. Through the work of patient archaeologists, these items gently reveal what Roman words do not always record. Imagine yourself in a museum storeroom, dim, quiet, and cool. Long shelves are lined with artifacts, catalogued not by glamour, but by scholarly care. A small figurine catches the eye, a terracotta statuette of a veiled woman. Her features are stylized, serene. She wears the flammeum, the orange-red bridal veil, delicately incised with fine lines. Perhaps she once stood in a household shrine, a quiet tribute to a daughter's wedding day, or an appeal to Venus for marital harmony. Elsewhere, in the excavation of a villa outside Pompeii, the charred remains of a wooden bridal chest were discovered. Sister, the Romans called it. Inside were delicate objects, bone combs, bronze mirrors, and small containers that once held scented unguents. These were personal things, feminine and practical, assembled for the moment a bride left her father's home. They represent more than grooming, they were part of her identity, the bridge between girlhood and married life. Roman weddings were rich with symbolism. Many of these symbols were small, yet deeply meaningful. Take, for instance, the tunica recta, the simple wedding tunic tied with the knot of Hercules. That knotted with a special pattern was not merely decorative. Hercules, in myth, was a paragon of strength and virility, and so the knot bore connotations of endurance, fidelity, and fertility. Its untying was both literal and symbolic, a private moment of transition following the public ritual. Other symbols were more communal. Archaeologists have uncovered mosaic floors in Roman homes that depict weddings scene-stylized, idealized, and tinged with mythology. Venus often features, sometimes accompanied by Cupid or the Three Graces, dancing in delicate postures across the tessellated surface. These images reflect more than artistic taste. They were protective and aspirational, woven into the very flooring of domestic life. One curious find, uncovered in Ostia Antica near Rome's Old Harbour, is a bronze wedding tocena tessera nuptialis. These tokens were not legal currency, but rather symbolic gifts or keepsakes, sometimes given to commemorate a union. Some bear inscriptions, others stylized images-linked hands, for instance, or scenes of doves nesting. Doves, sacred to Venus, were common symbols of affection and peace. Even food had its place in this symbology. In some preserved kitchen areas of villas, charred remains of special wedding cakes have been found. These were made with spelt flammeum, a grain sacred to early Roman ritual. In a custom known as conferriatio, a high-caste wedding ceremony, the bride and groom shared a sacred cake of spelt in front of the Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest. Though few practiced it by the imperial era, its echoes lingered in more modest forms. Beyond objects, there is the cultural residue of song. In a few villas, fragments of inscriptions suggest the presence of epithalamia wedding songs. These were chanted or sung by guests as the bride was escorted to her husband's home. Sometimes bawdy, sometimes solemn, these songs helped bridge the awkwardness of transition, infusing the moment with shared joy or perhaps laughter. We do not have recordings, of course, but you might imagine voices carrying softly through the night streets of Rome, torchlight flickering on rough cobbles, as neighbors lean from windows to listen. The melody is lost, but the presence remains. Roman wedding culture, then, is not merely textual, it is tactile, aromatic, etched into objects and echoed in architecture. It is a culture woven into the fibre of domestic life. The items left behind: combs, veils, cups, tokens, not treasures in the modern sense. They are whispers from lives long past, preserved by the quiet diligence of time and ash. And so, having brushed away the soil of centuries, let us now rise gently from the world of artifacts and return to living Rome. Let us explore how wedding customs diverged among different layers of society. The Roman world, like a mosaic, was composed of countless tesserae, a distinct part of society. The weddings of Rome were no exception to this intricate composition. While the central themes of union, tradition, and family extended across all classes, the experience of matrimony could vary quietly, yet profoundly, depending on one's station in life. Imagine first the wedding of an elite Roman family. We are in a domus nestled on the Palatine Hill, its marble atrium open to the sky. The occasion is not merely a private celebration, it is a matter of public interest. The bride, perhaps the daughter of a senator, is adorned in rich garments. Her tunica recta is of fine wool, soft and luminous. Her flammeum veil burns brightly in the sunlight, a vivid symbol not just of purity, but of the family's honor. Servants move with polished grace, their movements rehearsed and silent. A scribe waits to inscribe the dowry agreement, which has already been negotiated at length. This document is precise and binding, detailing land, coin, jewelry, or even slave sassets transferred as part of the bride's passage into her new household. The guests arrive in their finest togas, their presence both social obligation and political affirmation. The elite wedding ceremony, though steeped in tradition, is heavily formalized. The priest, sometimes a member of the pontifical college, oversees the ritual. Sacrifices may be made to Juno, goddess of marriage, and Vesta, guardian of the hearth. In some cases, the ancient rite of conferriatio is performed, involving the sacred spelt cake and the presence of 10 witnesses, an old ritual, mostly reserved for patrician families, its origins lost in the mists of early Rome. The procession afterward winds through Rome's wealthier districts, the bride accompanied by pipers and torchbearers. The streets are swept, the facades adorned. Coins may be tossed to onlookers, not for their need, but to affirm generosity. Upon reaching her new home, the bride is welcomed not just by a husband, but by his entire household, his mother, sisters, slaves, and perhaps a tutor who will one day teach their future children. Now, let the image shift. We are in Trastevere, across the Tiber. The sounds are livelier here, the bark of dogs, the creak of wagon wheels, the gossip of neighbours across balconies. This is the world of artisans, traders, and freedmen. In a small but clean apartment, a wedding is beginning. The bride, no less radiant in spirit, wears her veil dyed with a cheaper pigmenta, softer orange, perhaps a hand-dyed wool. Her tunic is of sturdy linen, ironed flat and scented with rosemary. The belt is knotted, but perhaps without precise ceremony. A neighbour acts as the officiant, not a priest, but a respected elder, because the legal essence of the wedding lies not in divine blessing but in mutual consent and the presence of witnesses. There is laughter, and perhaps a little chaos. A cousin arrives late, carrying a wine jug. Children dart in and out of the room. A simple offering is made at the family altar: bread, honey, and incense that sputters in the brazier. There is no dowry scroll on parchment, but an understanding, a few denarii, a pair of inherited earrings, and the promise of shared labour and home. The procession, if one occurs, is short, just down the block, with neighbours peering out and offering jokes and blessings. Perhaps a borrowed musician plays a pipe. Nuts are tossed not from baskets, but from eager pockets. The groom helps lift the bride over the threshold of their apartment, cracked tiles and all. It is small, perhaps a single room, but it is theirs. Yet in both weddings, whether on the polished steps of a senator's estate or the well-worn thresholds of a tenement, there is the same moment. A shared glance, a merging of two lives into a single domestic hope. A fire kindled on a new hearth, a bride holding her torch high, with steady hands, in the quiet of the evening. Class might dictate the trappings, the volume, the visibility, but the heart of a Roman wedding, its ritual, its rhythms, its gestures of beginning, remained remarkably consistent across the social spectrum. And now, having seen these weddings through the eyes of both noble and humble alike, let us wander into another dimension of Roman society, one that complicates, questions, and occasionally defies the expectations of marriage itself. In the architecture of Roman society, marriage was more than personal, it was foundational. And for Roman women, it shaped not just their domestic lives, but their identities, their freedoms, and their destinies. From the moment a Roman girl was born, her path toward matrimony was almost always assumed. Her education, if she received one, was oriented around domesticity, how to manage a household, how to spin wool, how to carry herself with dignity and decorum. Even among wealthier families where reading and writing were taught, these skills were often seen as adornments, useful, but not essential to her primary role as wife and mother. Marriage, then, was less about personal choice and more about family duty. Most Roman girls were wed in their early to mid-teens, often to men much older than themselves. The match was arranged by their father, whose legal authority, the patria potestas, was absolute. Even among the upper class, love matches were rare and often secondary to politics, alliances, and economic interests. But within these structured confines, women navigated a complex world. The nature of the marriage itself could vary. There was manus, a more traditional form in which the wife passed from her father's legal control into that of her husband. But over time, especially in the later Republic and imperial periods, a freer form sign manu became more common. In this arrangement, the woman remained legally under her father's authority, even while living with her husband. This subtle shift had profound implications. It allowed women to retain property, influence household finances, and even initiate divorce. Divorce, in fact, was far more common in Rome than one might expect. Either party could initiate it, and no legal justification was required. A message sent, a declaration made, tuus res tibi habeto, meaning, keep your things, could end a marriage. While the social stigma varied depending on class and circumstance, the practical reality was that Roman marriage was a contract that could be unbound without elaborate ceremony. Still, the expectations of a Roman wife were significant. She was to be loyal, industrious, modest, and invisible to public scandal. The ideal wife was often compared to the distaff spinning wool and bearing children. Her virtue was measured not in words, but in silence, obedience, and fecundity. And yet, within these expectations, individual women found means of expression and agency. Letters survive etched on tablets or scrawled on papyri where Roman women assert their wishes, manage estates, negotiate dowries, and even run businesses. In cities like Pompeii, inscriptions name women as patrons of temples, donors to public works, and proprietors of taverns. Marriage was not just about the wedding day, it was about what came after. The daily rhythms of shared meals, of raising children, of managing slaves and household accounts, and always, the negotiation between societal role and personal reality. The poet Catullus writes of love and longing, of the tension between desire and duty, and in the quieter records wills, dowry lists, funerary epitaphsue, glimpse the lived experiences of Roman women. One such inscription, carved in marble, reads, "She kept the house, spun the wool, walked with dignity, and bore 3 children who survive her." Another, simpler still, "To my wife, who was kind, and made my life good." Even in a world defined by male authority, women's lives and their marriage shaped the fabric of Roman society in ways both visible and subtle. Now, as we draw back from the individual lives shaped by marriage, let us observe how weddings themselves were woven into the religious and ritualistic life of Rome. For no Roman event was entirely secular. Let us explore the gods, the omens, and the silent expectations that watched over every bride and groom. In ancient Rome, no wedding stood alone in the realm of the human. It was watched over, shaped by, and ultimately sanctified through a host of divine figures, ancient rites, and carefully observed omens. Religion, for the Romans, was not a matter of fervent belief, but of meticulous practice. It was, in essence, a contract between mortal and divine, sealed through custom. Foremost among the deities presiding over marriage was Juno, the consort of Jupiter, goddess of women, childbirth, and matrimony. Known specifically in her aspect as Juno Pronuba, she was invoked to bless the union and ensure fertility, harmony, and social legitimacy. Her presence was assumed, not questioned. Every Roman bride, from the wealthiest matron to the humblest weaver's daughter, would carry some invocation to Juno into her marriage. Before the wedding day, families would consult omens. The reading of the august priests who interpreted the will of the gods through the flight of birds might be undertaken, especially among the elite. A favourable sign, such as a bird flying from the left to the right, was cause for proceeding with the ceremony. A poorly timed thunderclap or a sudden illness might delay the event altogether. The day itself was chosen with care. Certain days were deemed unluckities, nefasta days when public business and private rituals alike were forbidden. Marriages were never performed during the entire month of May, believed to be inauspicious due to its association with the Lemuria, a festival to appease restless spirits of the dead. June, by contrast, was favoured, perhaps due to Juno's patronage, giving rise to the tradition of June weddings, a custom that echoes faintly even today. One of the most ancient rituals was the conferitio ceremony, practiced primarily among patrician families. Named for the spelt cake forium shared by bride and groom, it was witnessed by 10 citizens and presided over by the Pontifex Maximus. The cake, made from an archaic grain and offered with wine, symbolized the simple agricultural origins of Rome, hearkening back to a time when bread and land were the foundations of life. More commonly, other wedding ceremonies involved libations, incense offerings, and brief sacrifices. A pig might be offered before the household altalerariuma, nod to the lares, guardian spirits of the family. The smoke from the incense would spiral gently into the air, believed to carry prayers to the heavens, while the scent of burnt bay or juniper cleansed the space of ill will. Ritual phrases were also critical. The bride's solemn pronouncement, ubii tu Gaius, ego Gaia, was more than poetic. It was a formula, an ancient code passed down from the earliest days of the Republic, binding the woman to her new household. It was uttered not just with the tongue, but with intention and gravity. In the procession that followed the ceremony, the torches carried by friends and slaves had symbolic value too. They represented the light of the hearth to which the bride would now tend. Sometimes these torches were later extinguished, and their ashes buried beneath the threshold of the new homine offering of sorts to domestic harmony. The moment the bride crossed into her husband's house was itself rich in symbolic action. She was carried or lifted over the threshold, not merely for convenience, but to avoid the ill omen of stumbling interpreted as a bad start. Once inside, she would greet the lares of her new home, sometimes placing a small offering at their shrine, acknowledging their role as protectors of the household and gatekeepers of her new life. And, in the intimacy of the marriage bed, another rite might unfold quiet and personal. Before consummation, the bride could unbind her nodus, Herculeanus the knot of Hercules not by the groom's hand, but her own, in silent appeal for strength, protection, and fecundity. It was a moment of transition, both practical and spiritual. Though many of these rituals faded in the later empire, their influence lingered. The Romans believed that failing to honor the gods risked not only bad fortune for the couple, but disruption to the broader fabric of civic and familial order. A marriage done without ritual was not just a private lapsite, was a spiritual imbalance. Even now, as we consider these rites in the soft stillness of hindsight, there is something enduring in the gestures, the lighting of a torch, the placement of a veil, the gentle utterance of an oath. They remind us that, across centuries, human unions have long sought the blessing of forces beyond their control, weaving the sacred into the everyday. With the divine acknowledged and the omens observed, let us now turn to a more festive realm, the celebration that followed the rites. Join me next as we recline at the wedding feast, a gathering of tastes, toasts, and timeless Roman hospitality. The sacred vows have been spoken, the offerings made, the procession complete. Now, in the cooling hush of the Roman evening, the house begins to fill with the rustle of guests, the clinking of pottery, and the faint strains of music drifting from a distant corner of the courtyard. It is time for the scena nuptialis, the wedding banquet. Whether in a sprawling domus on the Aventine or in a modest suburban villa, the layout is much the same. Cushions are arranged around low dining couches lecti triclinarii for those of standing. Others, depending on rank and relation, sit at stools or benches along the periphery. The bride, now unveiled, takes her place beside the groom, though both are subtly set apart, observed with interest and occasional jest by those around them. The mood is a curious blend of formality and mirth. There are toasts made in quiet dignity, followed by laughter that grows as the wine flows. Roman banquets were not wild affairs sat, least not at the beginning. They moved in slow stages, from the ceremonial to the indulgent, much like the wedding day itself. The food is simple, yet carefully chosen. For the elite, the banquet might begin with an array of gustatio, or appetizers, boiled eggs sprinkled with herbs, olives marinated in brine, and small fish seasoned with garum, the ubiquitous fermented sauce of the Roman table. These are accompanied by cups of watered wine, chilled in summer with snow packed in amphorae, brought down from the Apennines. The main course prima mensa might feature roasted fowl, pork glazed with honey and vinegar, or lamb stewed with apricots and almonds. Bread is always present, shaped into flat loaves and served with cheese or pulses. For the wealthy, rare delicacies might be presented dormice stuffed with nuts and herbs, or flamingo tongue, praised by gourmets for its tender texture. Dessert secunda mensae lighter and sweeter. Plates of dates, figs, and honeyed nuts are passed among the guests. Occasionally, a cake is served, shaped into a round to symbolize eternity. This may be a vestige of the earlier farium, now softened into sponge and soaked with wine. Entertainment fills the spaces between courses. A hired lyre player strums soft harmonies, perhaps a flute accompanies, its tone high and airy. In larger feasts, dancers may perform a girl from the east, perhaps with veils and flowing sleeves, or a boy with painted eyes tracing slow arcs through the torchlight. For common folk, the feast is simpler but no less heartfelt. A stew of lentils and sausage bubbles in a clay pot. Bread is torn by hand, and wine is poured from earthen jugs. Neighbours sing, jokes are exchanged, and children dart between the grown-ups, giddy with the day's celebration. Even the modest wish to mark the moment with warmth and memory. Among all levels of society, there are evening rituals. One such tradition is the singing of the epithalamium, a wedding hymn, performed by friends, as the bride is led to her chamber. These songs could be chaste or cheeky, filled with puns and playful teasing, meant to ease tension and welcome intimacy with good humor. Then, the final moment, the lighting of the torch. The bride takes a flame from the central hearth and carries it to the threshold of her new room. This act is quiet, solemn, often done in silence. It signifies not only her departure from her father's home, but the lighting of a new hearthstone that, if the gods are kind, will one day warm the lives of children and grandchildren. As guests begin to drift away, leaving the couple in peace, the house falls slowly into stillness. Plates are cleared, the last candle flickers. A few sleepy toasts are murmured before the night claims the feast. Whether grand or humble, the Roman wedding meal was more than nourishment. It was communion between families, between past and future, between the sacred and the personal. And like all things Roman, it was layered in meaning, measured in rhythm, and rooted in memory. Now, with the feast behind us, and the night deepening, let us consider the quiet legacy these weddings have left behind, not in grand monuments, but in subtle echoes, rituals and beliefs that still thread their way through our own ceremonies, even now. Time, like the Tiber, flows onward, reshaping the world while quietly carrying traces of the past along its banks. Though the Roman Empire has long since fallen, scattered into ruins and relics, certain customs, especially those tied to weddings, have proven curiously resilient. If one listens closely, even today's ceremonies still echo with the whispers of ancient Rome. Consider, for instance, the wedding veil. The Roman flammeum, dyed the colour of fire, was more than ornament. It marked the bride as sacred in her transition, anointed by tradition. Today, the veil persists, now usually white, draped delicately over the head and shoulders of brides across many cultures. Its colour may have changed, its symbolism softened, but the gesture remains a visible sign of entering a new chapter. Then there is the wedding ring. Though not universally worn in Roman marriages, rings were often given during betrothal, sponsiliars, a pledge of intent. Wealthier Romans used iron rings, sometimes engraved, worn on the fourth finger of the left hand. They believed this finger contained the vena amoris, vein of love, which ran directly to the heart. It is a belief more poetic than anatomical, but even so, the custom endures in many corners of the modern world. The Roman dowry, too, finds quiet echoes in the wedding gifts and prenups of today. Though rarely as rigid or transactional, modern marriages sometimes still include discussions of assets, property, or inheritance. In both ancient and present contexts, marriage is not only romanticit, is also a social and legal contract. Even the phrase tying the knot harks back, with subtle roots in the Roman bridal belt, the nodus Herculeanus. This symbolic knot, meant to be untied by the husband, represented fertility and strength. Today, the expression may lack literal ties, but it conveys the same threshold-crossing moment, a life changed through union. The presence of witnesses essential to a legal Roman wedding remains vital in modern ceremonies. Whether it's a notary, a celebrant, or simply friends standing by, the act of marriage is still performed in the sight of others, reinforcing its legitimacy and its social recognition. The notion of the bride being carried across the threshold also finds its origins in Roman practice. To stumble, as the Romans believed, was to invite misfortune. Thus, lifting the bride was both protective and symbolic. Even now, in homes far from the Roman forum, that gesture lives on, playful, romantic, and steeped in unseen history. Wedding processions, celebratory feasts, toasts to health and happiness, all of these were known to the Romans. The vocabulary has shifted, the flavors have changed, but the rhythm, the human rhythm of marking a transition with shared ritual, remains surprisingly familiar. Even our language preserves traces. The English word matrimony draws from the Latin matrimonium, emphasizing the role of the mother. Nuptials comes from nuptiae, the Roman term for the wedding ceremony. When we say these words, we are, in a way, speaking with Roman tongues. Yet not all traditions have endured. The Roman bride's hair, once parted with a spearhead, as a nod to ancient warrior virtues, has faded into obscurity. So, too, has the sacred spelt cake, once consumed before the gods. The old rituals, those quiet offerings to lares and penitesa, are now remembered only in textbooks and ruins. Still, the essence remains. Across the ages, Across empires and continents, the wedding continues to serve as a rite of passage uniting not only two people, but their histories, hopes, and futures. It is a moment poised between the past and what is to come, marked by gestures that, though modernized, carry the soft shadow of antiquity. So, when the next wedding you attend begins when the veil is lifted, the vows exchanged, the glasses raised pause for just a moment. Beneath the music and the sparkle, you may hear the distant sound of Roman pipes, the hush of sandals on marble, the rustle of a flame-coloured veil moving toward a hearth. Let us now bring this quiet journey to its close, with a gentle reflection on what these ancient customs remind us not just about weddings, but about the enduring human desire for ritual, for connection, and for beginning again. And now, dear listener, the torches have dimmed, the guests have long since departed, the feasting platters have been cleared, and the last strains of the wedding hymn have faded into memory. You have walked the shaded lanes of ancient Rome, where cobblestones echoed with bridal processions and ivory figurines watched over sacred vows. You have reclined at the wedding feasts of senators and artisans alike, and seen how love, duty, and ritual interwove to shape a society's most cherished bond. Perhaps what lingers most is not the grandeur of the temples or the precision of the contracts, but the small, enduring gestures, the touch of a bride's hand to a flame, the quiet tightening of a sacred knot, the murmured words that once sealed lifetime subi, tu Gaius, ego Gaia. These moments, so far removed from our own time, still pulse gently beneath the surface of today's ceremonies. For though centuries have passed and empires have risen and crumbled, the human heart continues to seek meaning in the joining of lives. We mark these moments then and now not with urgency, but with care, with hope, and with reverence. Let this story drift with you now, like incense rising into still night air. Allow the soft rhythms of Roman customs to lull your thoughts into calmness, the way a distant harp might ease a room into silence. You may find that, even as sleep begins to take hold, small pieces of this ancient world remain with you: the scent of bay leaves in a courtyard, the flicker of firelight on mosaic floors, the echo of footsteps crossing a threshold into something new. Rest now, knowing that history holds no rush, no sharp corners here, only the long, slow turning of time and the gentle unfolding of human stories, old and evergreen. Good night, traveller, and thank you for walking with us through the wedding rituals of ancient Rome. May your dreams be quiet and your hearth ever warm.